Next, how does the CIA prevent people from discovering the truth about the ice ages? I showed these two earlier. I'm going to repeat it again so it burns into your neurons. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. William Casey, director of the CIA. From Ken Kuzman's letter, an impending disaster that takes place every 12 to 15,000 years. And those polar reversals don't happen every 300 or 600,000 years. They know it's about 12,000 years. He said many scientists are aware of this and that the covert reason for the space program was to explore the effects of the disaster throughout the solar system. You saw when they created NASA, he's telling the truth. He also said we do not have the technology nor the foreseeable technology to avoid this inevitable situation. All we can hope to do is gather information. That's a fatalistic point of view, and I can understand why they had it in 1958, 59, but they shouldn't now. You can survive this thing. The way they control what you read in journals and what scientists do research for is, remember, they apply to the National Science Foundation for their missing 2 months, and that's how they control it. He who pays the piper plays the tune. So if you present a paper, say, hey, I think the sun nova isn't, I'm going to prove it, you're not going to get any grant money. They'll simply say, well, this is outside the scope of what the average scientist believes in, and therefore we're not giving you the money. And I'm sure many scientists have gotten answers like that. Now, I also know this firsthand because when you read all the science journals I have, you can see where a scientist is writing between the lines. He's saying a nova without saying it. I'll continue. I want to go through a number of points that I know they've either obscured or changed the definition of or the cause of. Now, as they're trying to find another explanation for the phenomena. The first one, which is what led me on to the 6 blank periods of space, is Bok globulars. And these little gray spots or dark areas are basically a big dust cloud around a star. And it was triangulated, and they figured it was between about 11,400 to about 13,000 something light years away from the Earth. These are all stars, probably like our own sun, that had novaed and the dust shell expanded, and you can't see them for about 1,000 years, and that's what happens. Bok had found 450 of these all around our solar system, both closer to the center of the galaxy as well as farther away from the center of the galaxy, which makes no sense. So it makes no sense to have, the explanation they eventually gave these things was planetary nebula. And I think the next one shows, well, you'll see in a few minutes what a planetary nebula is, a big dust shell around a star. And what the cover story, or the substitute explanation, to be polite, was that this is the beginning of a star and the interstellar dust collapses down by mutual gravity, never explained how, and all of a sudden magically it becomes a star that produces a tremendous amount of energy and heats the place up. The problem is this. When they first discovered quasars, they've mapped over, I've seen 2 numbers, either 100,000 quasars or I've seen a number of 200,000 quasars. But most of them that they see are close enough to see, delineate. This is one that's, I think it's 2.4 million light years away. You see this? This isn't dust or gas. That's stars, otherwise you'd never see it. And they shoot out from 2 different directions. This is a NASA drawing of what they think one of these quasars is. I don't know where they got the idea of the toroid around here, but from a finite point, that's only 0.3 to a 0.8 light years across, you have millions to billions of stars pouring out of this thing. Now also it rotates and twists. That's where you get this twisting action in a spiral galaxy. So in other words, the stars on the outside here are older than the ones just coming out of this portal. That's real logical. Can't fight that logic. So it makes no sense to have a brand new star in the vicinity of a bunch of old stars like ours. Ours must be at least 7 or 8 billion years old. We're about 30,000 light years from the center of our galaxy, but it's not like a straight line. It's a big curve. So you measure that whole distance, you get an idea, my God, we're pretty old. Anyway, that's really what's going on. So I got a problem. Here we know stars are coming from the middle of a quasar. Once they called them white holes. That actually made more sense. You have a tremendous amount of mass coming from a point in time and space that's very small at a nothing, and is going out in 2 different directions, 180 degrees from each other. That's how stars are born. Not that crap that they teach you, but the reason they say that is because they're trying to get you away from the idea that these stars nova. Number 3 in the hit parade, the construction of our sun. The idea is one big mass inside, there's a bunch of atomic bombs going on, hydrogen bombs going off in here, and it gets to the surface. This is the chromosphere, the photosphere, and supposedly this is where what we see here. The holes are due to energy that comes through, and magnetic streams make these holes in the chromosphere. No. By the theory of multidimensional reality, it's a center modulation point, just like the center of the Earth. And notice there's a big plasma. A lot of information being directed to a point in time and space. And out here is where this energy, or this information/energy, goes down enough that can start creating matter. First it's information, and then creates matter. That's what it is. So a lot of scientists know that this thing can't be made the way it is. Here's some of these things I put down the journal, the volume, the name of the journal, the volume, the date, and the page number. Go search it yourself. I could have made this list about 5 times longer, but what's the point? I run out of room. Also, the sun has about 20 different oscillations we know of. Here's some of them that are mentioned here. These 2 here basically said, there's no way this sun could be powered by nuclear fusion and have these frequencies going on. Just no way. There's no provision in nuclear physics to allow that. But we know it's there. You can see it for yourself. In a second, you're going to see what it looks like it's called helioseismology. And it pulsates from this to that, and it goes back to this. It oscillates backwards and forwards. Here's other drawings of the same process that other scientists had made. Does this look like a bunch of hydrogen bombs going off? No. Something's in the center of this star that shares the same frequencies as the center of the Earth, like I explained much, much earlier in one of my other videos. I think it was a video series 1. So it's not powered what they say. The reason why they want to give you this nonsense, they don't want you to look at the sun as the source, the missing heat that creates the ice age. And you saw how easy it was to prove it. Here's examples of stars that have nova. This is V838. Let's see if I can pronounce it. Monocerotis. It's about 24,000 light years away. It was 24,000 something light years. And the light finally reached us at 2002, I believe. And we have the whole series of when the thing was just a star and then started to blow up. And the stupid explanation they gave, I have the paper by a Polish astrophysicist. He said this was a light echo. Like nonsense, it's a light echo. We have the whole series of as this dust shell expanded. But you'll also notice there's the star. It didn't become a neutron star, a black hole, or anything else like that. It's still there. The same thing is true for all these other, they call these planetary nebulas, supposedly a new star in our vicinity. This is all within 12,000 light years of us. There's the star. It didn't blow up, didn't become a neutron star, it's still there. This is the dust that it blew out after it novaed. Here's more examples of it. There's the center of the star, and this is what it looks like. By the way, they all look a little different. It's like people are all different. The stars are all a little different. They all blow differently. Okay, there's about 5 different explanations for what causes the Ice Age. I'm going to go through them fast. I have some of the references here. There's a lot more in the book. I had like 26 pages of endnotes. And just in chapter 8, which is where this stuff is, I think I have over 400 references from the journals. Anyway, astronomical theory of glaciation. The Earth received less energy output from the sun, causing a variety of reasons. And I got some of the reasons in here. But basically, it's either we went through a period of interstellar dust that we received less light from the sun, and some other crazy, weird explanations, all trying to figure out why they knew this thing happened cyclically through time, roughly 12,000 years. Second, continental drift causing land masses to move to colder latitudes. We know about continents drifting, but it's like 1 or 2 inches per year it spreads out from the mid-Atlantic ridge. But that's not going to explain these things at every 12,000 so years. There's just no way. The continents don't move that fast. 3, the Earth's rotation, tilt, and poles change, placing the north and south poles in different locations. What they're saying is that the Earth itself started moving like this, and so let's say New York City wound up to be the North Pole, or Washington State, or Vladivostok, you know. Again, it doesn't explain a lot of the phenomena, including the mass extinction of species, the creation of new species, which I'll go to later. 4, the change of the ocean's current. There's the citation, 2 of them. Remember the movie The Day After Tomorrow, where supposedly some cold air from the Arctic came down and made an ice age? And it took place in New York. The only problem they have is that the last ice age, New York City supposedly had an ice field of at least 4,000 or 5,000 feet thick. That wasn't what they showed in the movie. And last, this is the one that you've all been brainwashed to think. How CO2 increases and a greenhouse effect causes the ice age, because CO2 found in gas bubbles in glacial ice. This is William Bowker from Lamont Doherty, Columbia University, known for basically one thing, to graduate left-wing Marxists and communists, especially in the journalism department. I read his article several times. I have it. No place in that whole article does he mention the word sun as a cause of anything. Several years after he wrote this paper in 1985, scientists came up and said, there's over 1,000 journal articles that show the sun-earth weather connection, which anybody with an IQ over 80 would have already known. He wrote a political document, and there's a reason why. It has to do with the Rockefeller Foundation, which heavily funds Columbia University and their journalism department. And they're the ones who came up with CO2. The reason why the CO2 is in the gas bubbles is very simple. If the sun novas and hits one side of the Earth, last time it was, I believe, if you do the longitude of China and India, that's where it hit. So any organic material facing the sun, when it novaed, remember, the Earth stops its rotation, and it gets a good blast of heat as well as cosmic and gamma rays and ultraviolet light. It's going to burn. So what's the byproduct of organic material burning? Carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. That's why the gas bubbles in the glaciers have a higher amount of CO2 in them. Again, this is all to deceive you, to get you away from the fact our sun novas repeatedly. By the way, once you know it happens repeatedly, you can take nuclear physics and throw in the garbage, because it means the universe is the product of information. And the nuclear physics we have today is anything but that, as I explained in video series 1. Okay, the next one, explanation of what's in the center of the Earth. I went through this in video series 1 on dimensions 5 through 8. It isn't a solid iron core. If it was, in the center of this thing, iron loses its magnetic ability after the Curie temperature of either 975 or 1050, depending on the iron. And it takes time for the increased spike. It's a center modulation point, which is in here, just like the sun. But it takes about 240 to 280 days for a spike of energy here to translate through the outer core of the mantle, and finally the crust will start moving, and you'll get to see of earthquakes as well as increase in volcanoes. So that explanation, they give you an alternate explanation for almost everything. They don't want you to get to look at, 1, the universe is the product of information, 2, our sun novas. The next, the Earth's magnetic field itself. Now you've seen, and I've seen articles in YouTube and other places that NASA and others know it looks like the Earth's magnetic field is about to reverse. One of the models that's somewhat accepted, I think, was developed by Professor Busey from UCLA. I actually spoke to him when I lived in West LA. And his idea was that you had convection currents of iron going in the outer core like this into the mantle, and these set up an electrical field. The only problem with that is when you have multiples, which you'd have to have multiple convection currents, the magnetic fields, if they cross each other, they cancel each other out. What's causing this stuff, like I explained in video series 1, is you have a center modulation point. It propagates various frequencies, and we know that from the DE, F1, and F2 layers in the ionosphere. So when it reverses, it does it in one day. But it doesn't have to go to 0. It goes, I think, to maybe about 15,000 gammas, and then it can reverse itself. And that's explained in the book. The book has a much, much larger and longer explanation. I've changed a few thoughts over the last 11 years since I wrote God's Day of Judgment book. But anyway, seafloor spreading. This is a fact. They started taking magnetometers and dragging along a ship from the mid-Atlantic ridge where lava comes up and where the European continent and the African continent separates from North and South America. It spreads out. In some places it's 1 inch per year, some places it's 2 inches per year. But we know from the readings that it's very even, and it's not every 300 or 400 or 600,000 years. It's not that, and they know it. But they just leave it. It's a fact, and it just is left, and they did hundreds of these measurements, by the way. The Navy did hundreds of them. So anyway, they know the polar reversals happen equally through time. Next, mass extinction of species and the creation of new ones. It's easy to explain the mass extinction of species. These are the major epochs or blocks of time that we measure in geology. And each one of these is marked by a major polar reversal, a geomagnetic reversal. You have an extinction and a creation of new species based on the old one. Now, that's the part they cannot explain. There's only 3 things that alter the DNA in our genes: cosmic rays, gamma rays, and ultraviolet light. Some of these journal articles I have here go into that stuff. You can copy them. I have many, many more in the book. I could have had like 5 times more. It's a well-known fact that those are the things that alter the DNA in genes. When a star novas, it gives off all 3, cosmic rays, gamma rays, and ultraviolet light, and it affects everything. So in other words, you have one species And if its egg survived, its DNA gets modified by the cosmic rays given off when the sun novas, and a new species is born. Also, what's interesting about this, I'm going to mention it now. You'll notice in the past, we know that the Earth was closer to the sun, it was warmer, and we had a lot more water, which evaporates, a little bit evaporates every time there's a nova. But you notice the reptiles are all three-chambered hearts. They don't produce their own heat. They didn't have to because it was so much warmer. As the Earth got pushed further and further away from the sun, it got colder and colder. Here we are in the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene and Holocene is this current period. This Pleistocene period, which they estimate is about 1.8 million years ago, some say about 2.5 million years ago, is marked by repeated glaciations, repeated ice ages. It's because we're further away from the sun. You're going to see it shortly regarding the ocean levels over time. But alternate explanation was given for much of this stuff. The time periods are really guesswork. We really don't know. You try to do it by aluminum-26 and other isotopes, but it's somewhat guesswork. This is what I talk about the ocean levels and geomagnetic reversals. This was in one of my geology books. Actually, it was in the GSA Today, and it was wonderful. This is Triassic period, and this is an abrupt drop in the ocean level, 663 feet. You'll notice as we get closer to our time, this becomes less and less because every time there's a nova, we lose a little bit of water and we're pushed a little further away from the sun. So each one of these events lines up with a reversal. Black and white are alternate reversals. When you have this, it means they got so many they don't quite know how to delineate one from another. But you'll see as we go through time, Jurassic period early and then middle, 623, 583, on the average of where it's going down, and up to here. Then we get to late Jurassic period and then Cretaceous, 468 feet down as the average. So, and here's the magnetic fields. Here, highly variable polarity. They had so many there. They're all short-term stuff. That all they could say is that. Otherwise, you get a bunch of thin lines here. But they all correlate with an immediate drop in ocean water. They don't explain how this could happen, but now you know. When the sun novas, probably the sun side of the Earth, probably that ocean gets evaporated maybe 1,000, maybe 1,200 feet. After that passes, then the oceans kind of balance themselves out. We know about 400 feet. It was certainly for 50 or 100 years later, and then 350 for a while. Next explanation, the formation of comets. Big, dirty snowballs with radically elliptical orbits. This is supposed to be the sun. This is the Earth's orbit here. So, how do we get, the real question with a comet is, how come it's got this radical elliptical orbit going that way? You know, some force did something that forced a bunch of water and dust and rock to go that away from the sun. Well, now you know what it is. You saw it with the ocean levels. Some of these comets are from our oceans that had been evaporated and shot out into space, but they eventually lose momentum and the gravity of the sun brings it back. This one here is a path of a number of different comets. What's funny is the way they did this is that they made it all intersect the Earth's orbit, the third planet in the solar system. And some of these are probably from our own sun, but some in the past were from Mars also. I mean, we know they had oceans and stuff like that, and you'll see that shortly. the video after this is going to be on the proof that the sun does nova, the physical evidence it leaves behind. You'll enjoy that. Okay. This phenomena, they've never been able to explain. I'll explain why. These are the deep sea canyons. They show up all over the world. On every continental shelf, you'll have this kind of a pattern. Some of these canyons are a lot bigger than the Grand Canyon, and they go a lot longer too. And they can't explain it. I'm going to. There'll be, I think, video series in this video series 4. The third will be on the oceans. Anyway, Chemistry 1A or 101. Fresh water is lighter than salt water because the minerals in salt water. So when a river flows into the ocean, it leaves an alluvial plain like the Nile Delta, the Mississippi Delta, the Amazon has one, Bangladesh is basically the outflow of the Ganges River. It basically deposits silt. Okay. They knew something was up with this. Now, I know the Air Force knows in 1978 that the Earth's magnetic field controls the rotation of the Earth. And I'll go into that in, I think, the series on the ocean, because it fits then. Anyway, so how are all these canyons, really big ones, they go all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, by the way. How could they possibly form unless there was no salt water there, right? It has to be empty. Here's another one, how they mapped it. This is Oceanographer Canyon. I'll tell you what's so special about this one. The Navy built the Alvin in the early 60s. They must have caught on to what's going on. And they dove down into this sucker. And what they saw was evidence of a massive amount of water. They saw tree limbs. They saw huge rocks and boulders that were cascaded down these solid slopes down this thing. But they saw no current whatsoever today coming down here. So what was the force that pushed all these trees and other things down into these big, huge submarine canyons? I'll give you a clue. I already told you that the Air Force, by a RAND Corporation paper, which I have, and you'll see it when I do that video, they know, they want to figure out how come the Earth's rotation was slowing down. The end of the article basically says that the dipole, or the magnetic field of the Earth, decays, and that's the thing that's causing the Earth to slow down. Well, imagine when the Earth's magnetic field reverses. The Earth stops its rotation. So imagine, simple test, take a pan of water, fill it, try to increase your speed to about 3 miles an hour, stop short. Find out what happens. Now you know what happened here. So if you're sitting on the Atlantic side, which would be now, no, it was 2 cycles ago that was like that, you'd see the Atlantic Ocean rushing away from you real fast, all the way down to the bottom of the ocean. But on the other side, the Pacific's coming towards you real fast too. But I'll go into that when I cover the ocean. Here's on the west coast, Monterey, California. Here's the Monterey Canyon, as it meanders all the way down to the bottom of the Pacific. But you'll notice all along here is the same kind of gullies and patterns. Not as big as that, but here's a pretty big one here. So what's causing all this? You can't have this unless there was no ocean water there. There was one in one of my journal articles from GSA, Geological Society of America, which I'm a proud member of. In the Gulf of Mexico, somebody did a side scan radar of the Gulf of Mexico, and they found a meandering river all the way down to the Pacific, from the Colorado River all the way through there, and it's all covered by the ocean. But at one time, there was no ocean there in the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of Baja, rather. Anyway, this is this blow up here. This is wider than the Grand Canyon, goes deeper too. And this is only measuring up to about there. That's all. Goes way down. Next one, why is the sea surface temperature increasing? Again, global warming. Your hibachi and your SUV is causing it, and coal burning is definitely causing it. Here's our Gleisberg cycle. And one sunspot maximum after that would bring it up to here. But after that, it went steady. Now this is measured on Fahrenheit, so it's saying it's gone up to about 1.5 degrees warmer over this period of time. Now I've seen during sunspot maximums off the coast of Indonesia going up as much as 4 and 5 degrees during a sunspot maximum. It lags about 1 year to 2 years. It takes longer for water to heat up. So it gets its maximum about 1 year or 2 years after sunspot maximum. But it's the sun. This would be happening if nobody was on the planet. Next phenomena, just left out there and nobody could figure this sucker out. Of course I did. These are mammoths. This guy's fast frozen. This is a real photo of one, not an artist rendering. And some of it melted, and he's actually bleeding, but he's dead. And they found him. This is in Siberia to Russia, all along here. Now notice the rivers all flow north. I think really where their grazing area was in this area probably, so how do they get up here? The same thing goes up in Alaska here too. In fact, I saw mastodon teeth when I went gold mining in the Klondike, so in the tailings. Anyway, these guys were fast frozen, and with daisy cups still in their mouth, their flesh was still good that during the 18th and 19th century, much of the ivory in Europe came from here, from Russia, from mastodons and mammoths. So the question is, they were able to feed their sled dogs the flesh from these frozen animals. So how do they get fast frozen? The answer is what's happening 180 degrees on the other side of the Earth. That's the side that the dust shell hit 17 to 18 hours after the nova. It reaches the Earth at a speed of about 1,550 miles per second. Pretty fast. And I'll give you a hint what causes this. Boyle's Law. I'll explain it in greater detail later in another video in this series. Okay, how the CIA prevented people from discovering the truth about the ice ages. Well, you found out some of it. They gave you alternate explanations of the phenomena that were seen. Now, I wrote it down. I don't normally read stuff, but I had to think about this thing 3 or 4 times, how I was going to explain this. And this message is really to those in the CIA and their leadership. First of all, I want to state the reason I'm doing these videos is so some people will survive this polar reversal and ice age. Obviously, somebody did, otherwise we wouldn't be talking and living right now. And people survived all over the world. In my book, Reality Revealed, some 41 years ago, I go through the structures and mythologies from all over the world. People did survive it. But I don't think the leadership in the CIA really thinks anyone's going to make it. I really do. Let's recap what the CIA has done. Your leadership in 1958 decided to influence and increase the research on the sun and moon and get some answers from the research. That's why the space program and NASA, etc. After the samples came back from the moon in the late 60s and early 70s, you knew the sun did nova, and that was the missing heat that created the ice age and all ice ages. However, you didn't know the mechanism. I figured that out in 1977, and that's why your agent contacted me, I think 1979, 1980, I think is when he called me up, and when Fort Lewis had called me up. Sometime in the early 70s, your leadership must have game planned the real possibility our sun will nova again. You may have connected the polar reversal as the cause, but I see no proof for that yet. It is also obvious that your previous leadership had a fatalistic viewpoint and thought that no one could survive it. They're wrong. So it was important to cover up any research that would lead to the correct conclusion. Hence, National Science Foundation, and you made sure any scientist who was going to come to the right conclusion didn't get the funding. What you did was develop an alternate explanation for all the phenomena I listed below, or you dropped the phenomena you never mentioned, like Bach globules and a bunch of others. You just don't say anything. You must have been thrilled when Stephen Hawking came up with an alternate explanation for all the energy emitted from quasars. The reason I say that is the amount of energy coming from a quasar was like 10 to the 54 ergs. In other words, if it kept an output like that, it would have used up all the lighter elements. There wouldn't be any hydrogen, helium, oxygen, stuff like that. There wouldn't be any of that stuff because it would have all been used up as energy for this quote-unquote nuclear fuel, which is obviously totally wrong. You have directed and restricted the scientific research for the past 60 years to cover up the real causes of the Ice Age. You did that through the NSF, National Science Foundation, science journals you control directly and indirectly. I am sure your current leadership is asking for advice on climate change from professors that have been brainwashed for the last 60 years on the subjects you wanted to believe in. By definition, they cannot give you the right answer because they were never taught the whole truth. Maybe you think like your predecessor and Ken Kuzman's cousin, that there's nothing you can do, nobody's going to make the thing, so if it happens, so what? I'm sure you're trying to save yourselves, though. That I'm sure of. In conclusion, how stupid can you be? Do you actually think you can keep this event a secret and no one's going to suspect something's going to happen? People survived the last cataclysm, like I mentioned, all over the world. I don't know exactly how they did it, but they certainly did do it. You can survive this event, and I'm sure your leadership doesn't have a clue what to do to save themselves. Well, the moon will tell everybody something terrible is going to happen, and you cannot hide that. You only have less than 28 years before the next Gleisberg cycle between September and December 2046. This is a solar eclipse of 2015. And the sun was already a little bit bigger than the moon. Remember, we're all taught the moon's supposed to cover the photosphere and perfectly, and just see the corona. This is the one from the last one, February 26, 2017. There's the moon, really heavy filter. Here's the sun. Eventually, this thing's going to be a white sidewall tire. I mean, how dumb you make the people, they're going to know something terrible is going to happen. Besides, they're going to be linked to the hotter weather, more hurricanes, more tornadoes. You're going to know something bad's going to happen. You can't keep it a secret. Dye-Hole Foundation is a 501c3, like I said, a science foundation. Take contributions to continue our research, to hire basically geologists to do some more of the research, and also what to do and what side of the Earth is going to be facing the next nova. Because this thing's going to happen. Like I said in one of the videos on the 11th code system, Moses' 10 code system, there was 11th that was God's. The Torah actually gives an exact month, the day, and the year for the next reversal. I'm not kidding. And it was dead center between September and December 2046. I can't make this stuff up. I'm not that creative. Anyway, thank you for listening. I know I went long on it, but the subject is so important, I'm sure you realize it.